All right, are we ready to proceed? Excellent. I'm going to get going right on time this evening. Hello and good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Laura Patrick, I'm chair of the Trust Council, and I'd like to welcome you to our first pre-budget webinar for the fiscal year 2025-2026. This is an important opportunity for us to share information about our budget planning process and to hear from you, residents, property owners, and other community members across the Trust area. I'd like to introduce our CAO, Ruben Brownie, to introduce the staff that are joining us this evening.
Thank you, Chair Patrick, and good evening, everybody. Pleased to be joining you this evening. On the staff side to support this event, we have our Director of Financial Employee Services, Julia Mobbs, our Director of Trust Area Services, Claire Frater, our Communications Specialist, Morgana, and our Program Coordinator, Chloe, all helping put this event together tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you, staff, for taking this time this evening to be here. It's greatly appreciated. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. I'll begin with acknowledging with deep respect that the lands and waters of the Islands Trust have been home to Indigenous people since time immemorial. Their deep connection to these islands continues to this day. The Islands Trust and the Islands Trust Conservancy are committed to respectful relationships and ongoing dialogue with First Nations who have interests in the Trust area. I recently traveled to Lasqueti Island to celebrate an unveiling of a mural that represents the Indigenous history on Huete, as revealed through the archaeological record, memories, and traditions. Through this Huete archaeological project, the community, alongside Indigenous people and archaeologists, uncovered what was in plain sight to reveal this history. Just this week, on the island that I call home, I was shown a culturally modified Douglas fir tree, where the bark had been removed by chisels, and I learned that this was done to harvest fuel for wood. It was just amazing to see this. So next slide, please. So today's session is intended to provide you with an overview of the Islands Trust and the engagement process for this pre-budget consultation. I'll be leading the webinar and working through a presentation which I hope to go as quickly as I promise, 15 to 20 minutes, after which we will answer questions. So please use the Q&A chat function to send your questions to staff, and we'll answer those questions after the presentation. And if you'd like to email us comments on the webinar or about the Islands Trust budget, please feel free to email budget@islandstrust.bc.ca. It's up on the screen. Okay, next slide, please. The Islands Trust area is comprised of 13 local trust areas, or island groups in the Salish Sea, and Bowen Island Municipality. This is a special place. In 1974, the province of British Columbia created the Islands Trust as a special purpose government mandated to preserve and protect over 450 islands in the Salish Sea. Next. The Islands Trust's legislated object, or mandate, is unique and defined in the Islands Trust Act. This preserve and protect mandate is the heart of all we do. Because it is enshrined in provincial law, it may be interpreted, and that interpretation may evolve through time due to shifting circumstances, values, and accumulation of knowledge and experiences. For example, we have different challenges today than we did in 1974. The mandate is to preserve and protect three specific elements: the trust area, its unique amenities, and its unique environment, for the benefit of the residents in the trust area and of British Columbia generally. And very importantly, in cooperation with municipalities, regional districts, improvement districts, First Nations, other persons, organizations, and the government of British Columbia. This is a photo of the elected 26 members of Trust Council that governs the Islands Trust. As trustees, we serve a 4-year term, and the next election will occur in the fall of 26. The Islands Trust is a unique form of governance. Trustees have 2 roles. Your 2 locally elected trustees, along with an appointed chair, make up 12 local trust committees. Trust Council is comprised of the 24 local trustees and 2 municipal trustees from Bowen Island. Trust Council meets quarterly to discuss and act on matters that affect the entire Islands Trust area, including setting the budget, creating and monitoring a strategic plan, adopting the policy statement, and creating general policies in support of our mandate and good governance. In addition, I want to highlight that we are supported in our work by approximately 65 staff based in 3 offices in Victoria, Gabriel Island, and Salt Spring Island. This past March, Trust Council approved an updated strategic plan to guide our work. Focus areas in that plan include governance and organizational excellence, growth management and community resiliency, ecosystem health and integrity, climate change, First Nations relations and reconciliation. Our budget planning reflects these strategic priorities. At the beginning of each term, Trust Council elects a chair and 3 vice chairs to make up the executive committee. 2 representatives are also elected to sit on the Islands Trust Conservancy Board. Trust Council also establishes subcommittees to advise on the assigned work and projects, such as Financial Planning Committee, Trust Programs Committee, the Regional Planning Committee, the Governance Committee, and the Accessibility Committee. The pre-budget consultation is guided by the Financial Planning Committee. Local trust committees play a key role in the land use planning and regulation of their local trust areas. They are responsible for official community plans, land use bylaws, and development applications, always through the lens of preserving and protecting. The budget includes the resources needed to support these local responsibilities, and your input helps us understand what's important to you. Islands Trust funding comes from property taxes, grant funding, application fees, investment incomes, and reserve funds. This graphic shows that the average residential property value on the islands in the trust area and the average Islands Trust property tax levy. While property taxes comprise the largest part of our budget, the amount that you as a property owner pay to the Islands Trust is only one portion of your overall tax bill. The property tax bill residents receive will include the Islands Trust amount, along with property taxes from regional districts, improvement districts, or from the municipality, for those on Bowen Island, as well as other agencies. As the only municipality within the Islands Trust, Bowen Island has a unique relationship with the Trust and our work. Bowen Island is represented on the Islands Trust by 2 municipal trustees who are also municipal councilors for Bowen Island Municipality. Bowen Island benefits from the Islands Trust Preserve and Protect mandate, but does not use Islands Trust bylaw enforcement or land use planning services. Under the Islands Trust Act, we have responsibilities in 3 main areas: land use planning and regulation, advocacy and policy development, conservancy, land protection, and stewardship. Islands Trust staff work with each local trust committee to guide land use planning on the islands. This is done through official community plans, bylaws, and permitting functions. An important aspect of the Islands Trust is that official community plans and bylaw changes from each local trust committee also come forward to the executive committee for review and approval to confirm they are aligned with the Islands Trust policy statement. This allows for local land use decisions that reflect the unique context of each local trust area, while also ensuring a level of consistency across the region and alignment with Trust's legislative mandate. Official community plan amendments are not only approved by the executive committee, but also travel to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing for their approval. In addition to planning, we also deliver a range of programs to support our mandate across the whole trust area. You can see on the slide a number of the activities of work in this area. And last but far from least is the Islands Trust Conservancy. Reflecting our mandate, the Conservancy enables the protection of 115 properties across the trust area. It is really a great success story for the undertaken, with allies including landowners, local conservancies, environmental organizations, First Nations, municipalities, and other forms of government, charitable foundations, businesses, and private donors. The Conservancy is led by the Islands Trust Conservancy Board, which includes 3 Island Trust trustees and up to 3 members of the public appointed by the province. This year's Islands Trust Financial Planning Committee has decided to go with a slightly different budget public engagement process. We have not undertaken a public engagement process about a proposed budget since 2022. In past years, we've developed a draft budget and then asked for feedback on that budget in January before approving a budget in March. This has led to a rushed process and at times, and so this year we hope to get public feedback before we begin working on the 2026-27 budget, so we can get a sense of the priorities of the public. This pre-budget survey is now open and will be open until June 28. Once the survey closes, we will receive the results and consider the public feedback alongside other key factors, including operational needs, legislative requirements, and Trust Council's strategic plan. So while we want to hear from you, what we hear from you won't be the sole determinant of our budget decisions. It will be an important input for us to consider. This slide, I know it's tiny print, provides an overview of the annual budget process for the Islands Trust. Our fiscal year runs from April 1 to March 31st. Our budget process begins in the summer as our various Trust Council committees, local trust committees, begin assessing their anticipated budget needs for the next fiscal year. The Financial Planning Committee reviews the budget drafts, which is followed by a cycle of reviews and amendments by Trust Council. A draft budget is presented to Trust Council at its quarterly meeting in March, when the draft budget may be further amended and or approved. This is time-consuming and iterative process, but it should be because it's important that we invest the time needed to ensure alignment with priorities and fiscal accountability. It's also important to note that as we work through that process, we are also assessing against any changes in the broader context that might emerge throughout the year, such as changes to the economic outlook. This webinar is part of our broader effort to engage meaningfully with the public in budget development. If you've subscribed to the Islands Trust emails, you would have received an email about this survey. You might also have seen posters up in your communities or advertisements in the local papers. The online survey is open now and will be open until June 28th. To ensure that our engagement process is equitable, we also have paper versions of the survey available at all of our Islands Trust offices and in the Salt Spring Island Local Library. You can also call our Islands Trust staff if you'd like to complete the survey over the phone. We welcome your questions and comments at any time. Please send them to budget@islandstrust.bc.ca. For contact details and for more information about the Islands Trust and budget process, please visit our website at islandstrust.bc.ca/budget. The recording of this webinar will also be available on this page in the coming days. Now it's your turn. So there was the function to provide your questions at the bottom, and I hope some of you were typing away your questions during the presentation. I'm going to look to staff to manage the questions. Surely somebody must have questions, or you're just typing away now.
Chair Patrick, we do have one question has come in. Can you talk about the fixed non-discretionary costs versus the rest?
I think I'm going to refer to Director Mobbs, who is our financial expert.
Thanks, Chair. Checking everybody can see and hear me. Great. So great question. There are definitely two buckets of costs when we're looking at budgeting in most contexts, and certainly in the Islands Trust context. Some of our costs are discretionary, which means that we can influence those costs and shape them, and we have some control over them. And then there's other costs that are not discretionary. So for example, staff costs would be considered a non-discretionary cost in terms of we do need to pay the complement of staff that we are choosing to employ. So there may be some discretion as to how many staff you choose to employ, but of course, those are always considerations that need to be made when you're looking at planned projects and work initiatives that are, required in order for us to deliver on our mandate. I'm not sure if there's any specifics in that question, other than just sort of explaining the difference between the discretionary and non-discretionary. Certainly, I can add some detail if there's additional questions. And if our CAO has anything to supplement, of course, welcome to step in.
I think there was sort of a supplementary question there around how fixed those are. And I think to Director Bob's point, some of those are fixed, but they're, particularly when you look at the staffing side of things, but there are ways to manage some of those. So to a large extent, in one that sense, philosophically, you can say that almost everything is discretionary, but when we come to committing to fund certain things and we commit to having a certain staffing complement, then you commit to giving up some of your discretionary power over those things because you're committing to a certain level of funding.
Thank you.
We've got another question. Where can we see the draft budget?
Well, that's a good question, but I don't think there is a draft budget yet. That's why we're doing this as a pre-budget. The last year's budget would be available on the website, and I can look to staff for specifics as to where last year's budget is. But we've come to you before the budget's even been built. We want to hear from you on your priorities and interests so that we can build a draft budget that takes that into account at the beginning. I don't know if staff have any directions as to where budgets can be found on our website.
Yeah, if you go to our website at islandstrust.bc.ca, under the About Us tab in the top menu, there's a link to a section called Accountability, and within that is the budget section. And from there, you can access both the survey right now is linked to from there. But there's also additional information there on the approved budget for this year that's available through that tab.
We have another question that's just come in. What is the cost to the Islands Trust budget of the Islands Trust Conservancy? And a follow-up question, could the Islands Trust Conservancy be funded directly by the province?
These are good questions, but again, I think I'm going to look over to Director Mobbs.
Sure, I can lead us off there. So for the current year budget, that's fiscal 2025-26, we have $1.7 million that's budgeted for the work of the Conservancy. So that covers all costs for Conservancy staff, for the board, for property management costs, legal costs associated with Conservancy work, as well as a general administration allocation. So that administrative allocation is, a portion of sort of the staff in the background. So my team, the finance team, human resources, et cetera, those costs are allocated out across the organization. And the Conservancy takes about 15% of the administrative cost load. I probably look to the CAO to speak to whether or not those costs could be borne by the province or not.
That would be at the discretion of the province. to determine whether or not they were willing to do that. There has been some expression of interest from the Islands Trust overall about engaging the province in a conversation about its level of funding from the province. To date, there hasn't been any follow through on that particular question with the province. I would say, practically speaking, given the province's current fiscal outlook and how the work they have underway to manage that, I'm not confident that we would get a receptive audience if we took forward that request at this time, but it would, in theory, the province could, but it would be at the province's discretion to choose to do so.
I do see another question that's been posed. The question says, now when trustees consider a project, they're only given a small portion of the costs. Staff costs, the great majority of costs are not given. How can trustees possibly budget if they don't get the entire cost of each project, or at least an estimate? I think I can start answering some of this. I know as we go through our planning process, all projects, we create business cases and we justify the cost of that project. And you're right, the business case primarily focuses on the hard costs to the Islands Trust. And I know we are eager to work to a more, I guess you would say, whole accounting of projects as we go forward to, and I think that's the work that we're doing with the strategic plan and moving to more operational plans or department plans that really support that work so that we can achieve the work that we say we're going to do. I don't know if staff want to add to that.
I'll invite Director Mobbs if she has additional comment. I think it's fair to say that where there isn't in a business case a determined need for additional staffing and the costs that would be associated with that would come forward in a business case. But typically speaking, when we bring forward those business cases, if there's an assessment around staffing capacity and how that could be managed within the existing staff complement, and that should be a part of the project planning. I think it's fair to say, and senior staff and I have discussed quite recently, actually, there's an opportunity for us to elevate a level of transparency for trustees on that point, and maybe expand on that aspect of business cases to articulate how we anticipate managing a new project within existing staffing complement and or whether or not there's an additional funding necessary. But for the most part, many outside of major projects, much of that is managed by just managing and adjusting workload where we can within the existing staffing complement.
I'll just offer some supplementary comments on that. I think that's a great point that, you know, our business cases are really a funding request. So they are used to seek new funding or additional funding in a future fiscal year to support work that we'd like to undertake. And so generally we're not costing out sort of existing staff time, for example. Funding requests are expected to acknowledge and describe the staff resourcing that will be used in order to undertake a particular piece of work, which helps trustees understand the full resource allocation on the organization in order to achieve something. But yeah, certainly those are conversations that we're having internally, as our CAO mentioned, to see if there are sort of different ways that we could undertake a presentation of this material to help trustees in their decisions.
Well, thank you. I see another question here. It says, what is the budget for last year for total cost of bylaw? I'm going to assume bylaw enforcement. Do we have that breakdown? So I'm going to have to look to staff for that one.
That's me. So we're right now, actually, we're in the middle of our fiscal year audit. And so we've just put together those numbers. It'll take me a moment to pull that up. I can certainly get that information for last fiscal year. I do have the budget for the current year open. And for bylaw enforcement, we have around $550,000 allocated towards that work.
Thank you. See any other questions in the queue right now, but I'm going to wait a few moments.
We do have a follow-up question
Ah.
around the discussion of the Islands Trust Conservancy funding for it, whether the province, whether there should be a referendum in the trust area about whether or not the province could fund the Islands Trust Conservancy.
Ooh, I'll look to staff if anyone wants to tackle that one.
I would have to consult with staff on whether or not the Islands Trust itself has the latitude to convene a referendum. I'm not certain that we do. But if we did, it would be unlikely that it would be in any way binding on the province. And if it was the province that needed to convene yet, of course, that would be at the province's discretion as well. And I would just note that, of course, if the Islands Trust were to undertake a referendum like that, it itself would come at a cost as well, one that we would have to budget appropriately for as part of our budget planning cycle.
I'm not sure if there's still a desire to understand how much bylaw enforcement cost us last year. That was the actual question. So I've looked that up. It's $470,000 for our previous fiscal year.
Thank you very much. Give everyone a few moments to type away if there's questions here. I think the question is, can we break down the total cost of bylaw enforcement by island? For example, Salt Spring or Saturna.
We could. I would have to, it would take a while for me to pull that up on the fly here today, but certainly our accounting system is set up to generate costs by local trust area. So that is something that we would be able to dig into if asked.
We have another question that's come in. What is the plan for this year's budget deficit for 2026? Are there areas that are recommended cuts to Islands Trust?
Would you like me to?
Yeah, I was going to say, yes, go ahead.
Comment? Sure. So in the current fiscal year, we do have an approved annual deficit. That's a correct observation. In the public sector context, it's not unusual to have an annual deficit. Deficits are funded by internal sources of revenue. So in the Islands Trust context, our internal sources of revenue are surplus funds. Surplus funds are generated when we don't spend all of our budgets in previous years, and we collect taxation that we don't spend. The excess then flows into our surplus fund. So we draw on that to help pay for any deficits. And we also have reserve funds. So reserve funds are simply surplus funds that have been reserved for a particular purpose. And so at the end of the day, we are required by legislation to present a balanced budget. And so when we have a deficit, meaning our revenues are less than our planned spending, we intend to pay for that with surplus and reserve to get to a place of a balanced budget, which we do have for the fiscal 25-26 year.
Thank you. Oh, I think I think we had answered that question earlier, but what was our anticipated bylaw enforcement forecast for, forecast for this year? I guess it's, so we have budgeted. I thought you reported 550,000 approximately.
Yeah, this early in the fiscal year, our forecast is our budget. We don't yet have enough time that's gone by to have a change in expectation there. So $550,000 for bylaw enforcement.
And I think that question was asking about a forecast for next fiscal year, 26-27, and I don't think we'd be in a position to, we're too early. We haven't even really begun the budget cycle yet for 26-27. As Chair Patrick said, this pre-budget engagement exercise is our first step in that cycle. So we wouldn't be in a position to forecast what bylaw enforcement would be for next fiscal year at this stage. I see there's a question on the impact of temporary assignments for government staff. Just by way of context for that, so Islands Trust staff fall under the Public Service Acts, which means that, well, we are at arm's length from the provincial government. Our staff are part of the provincial public service, technically speaking, and so fall under the HR policies for the public service, and that includes the option for them to take temporary assignments elsewhere in the core provincial government. And the impact of that can be positive and negative. It can be positive in the sense that it provides an opportunity for staff to go on temporary assignments and gain development opportunities, and then bring those developed skills back to us when they return to their base position. But of course, it also means in the short term, we lose the expertise of those staff while they go off and pursue advancement of their careers. And in many cases, they will then not return to us, and it challenges us because we can only backfill their base position on a temporary basis. So it is a challenge for us, but there are pros and cons to it for sure. It also means that we are able to also take advantage sometimes of bringing experienced provincial staff into the Islands Trust on temporary assignments as well. So there are definitely pros and cons to the temporary assignment process, but it does create some pressure on us if we have employees who go on prolonged temporary assignments.
All right. I have another question similar to the earlier one on the Islands Trust Conservancy. It says, given that the Islands Trust work is done on behalf of the entire province, back to the Islands Trust Conservancy, what progress has been made to generate a provincial-wide taxation to cover the Islands Trust Conservancy budget? Well, I think we sort of answered that one earlier, that we've been trying to generate a request of the province to assist in funding. I don't know if staff have anything else to add on this one.
Only that I think, that the object of the trust does state that we do this work for the benefit of all British Columbians is a cornerstone of Islands Trust's advocacy around its position on funding from the province. But yeah, to date, there hasn't been any significant advancement of that discussion that I can think of, certainly in the short time that I've been here.
Thank you. We still have no questions in the queue at the moment. Remind everyone that the survey is open, and we do want to hear from you. Whether you get that great idea for a question after the webinar ends this evening, it's not too late. We do want to hear from you at the emails that we've provided. And we do want you to fill out the survey. Tell your friends. Any other questions? I don't want to rush us through the questions. Got a couple more questions here. Thank you. It says, thank you for this. We need to review the budget from last year to understand what is being funded. I guess, if that does help our budget, and I don't know if there's other means. I'll look to staff if there's what is available on our budget website to help people understand what we have.
Sure. For anyone who's interested in understanding in more detail what we're funding in the current year, what's been approved by Trust Council, the Islands Trust budget webpage will have some good information. There is a link on that page that will open up a PDF that provides a breakdown of our overall budget by the various functional areas of Islands Trust. and a high level of the various activities underneath each of those functional areas. For those that are really keen on even more detail, I'd encourage you to review the Trust Council agenda package from March 2025. That's when all of the business cases for new initiatives, as well as information on our operating costs and sort of standard pieces that we're funding annually can be found. Those would be the two places that I would suggest. And then for those who want to understand what's going into future budgets, as the chair had mentioned in the presentation, our budget development starts quite early in the fiscal year with the various trust bodies, such as the Islands Trust Conservancy Board and local trust committees and council committees, all beginning budget discussions even now. And all of that work then flows up into the first draft of the budget that Financial Planning Committee will review in November. So for those interested in the details for future, certainly pay attention to the various meetings that are happening at the Trust, and certainly to Financial Planning Committee beginning in November.
Thank you. There's a question here that's looking for year-to-date budget for travel and expenses of executives and staff of the Islands Trust.
Year-to-date information, we're only a month into our current fiscal year, and normal financial reporting practices, you tend to see a month delay because it takes time to get invoices and code them and get them into the accounting system. So as far as year-to-date for current fiscal year, I can't provide that at this time, unfortunately. Certainly, we've got the full fiscal year of information available in the year-end financial statements that are being prepared right now. I'm not sure if that responds to the question adequately or not. If there's a follow-up, I'll certainly take it.
I don't know, Director Mobbs, if you have off the top of your head the budgeted amounts for those items for this year. I do know that that was one area though that we did see some significant reductions come through both from Executive Committee and from Financial Planning around the travel for members of Executive Committee in particular, and some recognition that that they would reduce travel, particularly for in-person meetings and for attendance at Union of BC Municipalities and Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities conferences, where in the past potentially all members of Executive Committee would attend. This year the decision was that the budget would be reduced and likely see fewer members of Executive attend those events.
Accurate statements. I agree with the CAO. The budget for the current fiscal year, total budget for travel is just over 83,000. And then travel budget specifically dedicated to training opportunities is 27,000.
Thank you very much. We have a question here about the cost of applications. What is the individual application cost? I know from each local trust committee has a fee schedule for all the different types of applications that we have. I think the question is more or less how much are we getting recovered from our revenue versus cost? And I don't know if I know that that's a question on the survey as well, but is there someone that could answer that one? Or
I'll take a stab at it. So Chair Patrick's correct. Local trust committees do set their own fees. And so you might see slightly different fees in different local trust areas, and all of the fees bylaws are on the Islands Trust website. So you can have a look there for the amounts that are charged to applicants. As far as the cost to Islands Trust to process the various applications, it can vary. Depends on the type of application, the complexity of the application, perhaps the level of staff that you have assigned to that application. It also depends on sort of the amount of public input that's required. Some applications might be more complex and require more community meetings or more review by the local trust committee. So there's lots of different factors that can influence that cost. We do have a question in the survey that is available for the public to complete that speaks to the total cost of processing applications in a year. I believe that number is estimated at $1.5 million. That was generated taking a look at the staff that are currently allocated to processing applications in total, multiplied by the cost of those various staff persons. But we don't have an average cost of processing applications by application type currently. There was an exercise done a few years ago when the fees bylaws were reviewed to look at that very thing, and that information was actually used to generate the current fees. There's some conversation going on right now about particularly revisiting that. Of course, things have shifted in the workplace and salaries have changed. Fees bylaws do have an automatic 2% increase in those fees on an annual basis, but as everybody knows, that's not kept pace with inflation and cost of living. So there may be some, merit to reviewing those in the future. That will be a political decision. Anything else, CAO?
There was another question, sort of follow up to that. It was just asking for a shortfall of revenue versus cost on the applications, but I think, is that generally the question that's in the survey?
Yes, we don't sort of interpret the amount in that question. The cost to process applications in any given year was estimated around 1.5 million, and the fees received in any given year are estimated around $275,000. So it is a significant shortfall currently. One thing to acknowledge is included in the cost to process applications is the cost to process things like specific referrals where we don't actually receive a fee. And so there's no recovery on that staff time. So we will always have some distinction between those two numbers, but certainly right now it is a sizable shortfall.
There's a question if we've got any travel that's international or outside of the Islands Trust.
I don't think that there may have been historically, but I'm not aware. Certainly anything planned in terms of international travel, with the possible exception of EU chair potentially traveling to San Juan County. San Juan County representatives attended our December Trust Council meeting, and there was a agreed upon desire to reciprocate and have a meeting with them. Obviously, lots of opportunity for exchange and collaboration with San Juan County, so that would count as international, but expense would be limited. Travel outside of the trust area would, I suspect, I can't think of anything other than training and for staff. So for example, staff go on development programs and events that may be elsewhere in the province in the Lower Mainland, or potentially sometimes in the interior. And similarly, trustees and staff attending UBCM and ABICC, not likely outside of the trust area, but UBCM moves to different locations around the province, again, Lower Mainland, Whistler, Southern Interior. And so those would be events where we would travel, but otherwise, typically, the bulk of the travel expense is, certainly on the staff side, is around traveling within the trust area to do the work of the Islands Trust.
Thank you.
One other thing I'll just note there is we do oftentimes host meetings, like Trust Council meetings on the Big Rock. So in Victoria and Nanaimo, of course, those are outside of the trust area. But I think everyone's aware that we do that occasionally for logistical purposes. It is very rare for staff to be attending any training sort of outside of the province, as the CAO has noted. I do know there's been one instance in my time at the trust where staff has traveled outside of the province for training. It's very rare. It needs to be a very high class caliber training offering. It's not something that is generally approved.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the cost of the Trust Council quarterly meetings. I know that's a question in the survey as well. Do we have that cost?
It's typically, I think, estimated between 30 and 35,000, depending on the location where the meeting takes place. Obviously, that impacts, and the amount of travel associated impacts the cost of that.
Right. We have no open questions at this time. Just wait a moment. I don't want to rush anyone, but like I said, we do want to hear from you and your questions. All of it will be collected and shared with the trustees as they build the budget for this next fiscal year. And I'd love to hear feedback too. Is this useful to people of having coming early? Because I know I was one of the ones that was pushing for this. Let's go into the spring and ask before we build the budget. No. Oops, I have a question. Let's see. Do we cost recovery from islands? Bylaw costs, cost recovery from islands. I guess we can answer, I mean, this is local trust committees don't hold budget. I don't know if one of the staff members want to explain that in a little more detail of how our budget process works like that here at the Islands Trust.
I'd look for some clarity on the question, Chair. I'm not sure I understand the piece about cost recovery by island. Is the question looking to understand costs by local trust area compared to revenues generated in a local trust area? Is that the question? I heard the word bylaw in there, and so is it around cost recovery for bylaw activity on an island? I'd need to understand the question to respond.
So if the questioner could provide a little more detail on your question. I come back to, there's a next question. It says, given that the trust mandate is to preserve and protect the natural habitats, why is the planning, whoops, where did it go? Why is the planning budget not available to any property owner who wants to put a protective covenant on their property with all costs covered by the trust? Is that not coherent use of tax dollars? So I think that's asking if we could pay, or why is the cost of putting a covenant on your property not covered? I think is what that's saying. Who has an answer for that?
I can give it a go. So placing covenants on properties generates a benefit to a property owner under the NAPTEP program. And I'll let any staff correct me if I'm speaking on details of this incorrectly. And there is an application fee associated with that. I think that's what this question might be associated with. There is a program that allows applicants to seek sponsorship of that application in the same way that executive committee can sponsor development applications and waive all or part of a fee. There is also a sponsorship of NAPTEP applications. So there's opportunity for that to be covered in specific instances, but it is a political decision. That's probably about all I can offer. I think what the question was referring to.
I did have, we have had some comments on the structure of tonight's, and I really appreciate the feedback on, any feedback on how we could make this form of communication work better for people. And thank you for those. We have I think this is a bit out of the budget realm, but there's a question of, is there a benefit tax to a person who does place a a covenant on their property. I would assume that means a NAPTEC. And the answer is yes. Protection. I have to think natural area protection tax exempt. I gotta get all my letters there in that. But yes, you do get taxed. Your property value under the NAPTEP does reduce, and you do get a benefit in your property taxes.
Yes, that's correct. And the benefit is afforded to the portion of the property that is registered with the NAPTEP program. So it wouldn't be 100% reduction on your property taxes. I would need to look it up to confirm. I think the exemption on that portion of the property is, I want to say 65% of property taxation at this point. And I would, Chair, you were nodding along. I think that's the correct number. I haven't looked at it in a while. But certainly that information is available on our website as well if anyone is interested.
Yeah. All right, not seeing any additional questions. There's a question about bylaw enforcement budget. How is it done? By the hour, by the file, or total cost per year? I don't know. I'd have to look to staff.
Sure. So the bylaw costs are looked at not by file. There is a review of the staffing complement that's associated with bylaw enforcement services, a review of sort of historical legal costs associated with bylaw enforcement, as well as, sort of anticipation of potential future legal claims associated with that. And then there's an assessment of planned activities for the future year. So if there is an intention to increase activity in a particular area, we take that into account as well. But no, it's not looking at the number of files that are in existence. It's looking at overall costs and historical actuals and plans for future.
Thank you. I think this is again a very similar question as to what asking for why we can't cover the cost of putting protective covenants on properties. I think this would be a good question. I hope you're filling out the budget survey, and if that is something that people feel are important or want to see, that's what we need to hear. Not seeing any more questions at this moment. I'm coming up to 8 o'clock here. This again, do we have an hourly cost of enforcement? Again, I don't. I think you generally answered that question, Director Mobbs.
So the hourly cost of enforcement, sort of the data that would be available to us to look at might be the hourly cost for our bylaw enforcement officers. That might be slightly different for each officer depending on the level that they're working at and the length of time they've been with the organization or in the public service generally. There's also then, of course, some additional costs and staff for traveling or inspections or site visits, et cetera. But we don't have sort of an average hourly cost for bylaw enforcement available at this current moment.
Thank you. Alright. Not seeing any further open questions at this time. Whoops. Oh, here's a person out of my own heart. I'd like to see more funds directed to community engagement and communications, navigating rules and regulations, being accessible in person, and having meetings on the islands, on Island Trust Islands. Good feedback. Absolutely. And also we want to hear from people on how do we get out, how do we get heard? How do we get out there? How do we get information out into the communities as well as best we can? We want to hear from you on your ideas. We're not seeing any more questions coming in. Well, I think I really want to thank everyone that has joined us this evening. Your questions are all very useful. And I really appreciate and hope, and we want to be available. So please fill out the survey, type in your questions, get your feedback back to us. And we really do want to hear from you. And I think we don't have any further questions coming in here. We can, oops. Not sure. Not generally sure what that, I think this is not really a budget question, but well, thank you for your question. And all right. Again, like I said, we want to hear from you. Please get your comments in. I guess synergies. I'll ask, put your question out there. There is a mention in the trust objectives about the protection of habitat for the benefit of residents. Why is there no mention of the synergies of the natural habitat and their protection? It's a good question, but I can tell you we think about it all the time. When we do our watershed protection, we're always looking at the balance of water to be remaining in the environment for the benefit of the environment. So it's not just how much water can we remove to allow human habitation. We want to make sure that there is more than ample water to remain for the natural environment. So I think I can tell you it's on all of our minds of making sure we're protecting the environment and trying to keep it in a healthy state or even restoring. Okay. Well, with that, I think I want to thank everyone again tonight for coming. Really appreciate it. And please feel free to email us and get your information to us on your questions regarding building this next budget. With that, I really want to thank our staff this evening as well for taking time out of their evening to join us. And for everyone who came out, thank you. And look forward to hearing from you as we go through the very iterations of building this next budget. So thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.